Park XR is going to tell us about that.
Thank you so much, and thank you, AWE, for having me in this year's conference. And thank you, everybody, for joining me this morning. I'm Jane Hoffacker, CEO of Spiro Park XR. And before we jump into things, I'd love to just quickly introduce my startup. Spiro Park XR is building an entertainment network for 360 AR VR. We want to be the MTV for 360 VR videos. If you'd like to learn more, please reach out to me after today's session. But getting around to today's topic, this morning I'm going to share some lessons about value from the game industry and how those lessons insights might apply to AR VR. I'm super excited to talk about this topic because I've been hype about immersive and interactive entertainment since I was a little girl, and I'm sure many of you guys can relate. So let's begin with a basic understanding of value. In a marketplace, there's a price at which a good is sold and the cost at which a good is created. The difference between is profits. This is basic economics 101, right? Well, let's expand this a bit with the added value framework. Beyond price and cost, there's a cost below which a company would be not willing to sell. There's a cost above which a consumer would be unwilling to buy. And the difference between is total value. It's this total value that drives consumer and company behaviors over the long run. If you're skeptical, consider this object. It was purchased in a thrift store for 25 cents. And how much do you think someone would be willing to buy it for? Well, on eBay, the going price for a plastic banana is between $1 and $16.99. And let's just assume that the seller is rational and doesn't want to lose money on the investment. So 25 cents is his floor. Well, it ended up selling for $76 on eBay. That's a 30,000% return. How? The seller created a funny story behind it, a silly tale about a man stuck in a zoo exhibit in an alien planet. And this comic, which wasn't even shipped with the product, by the way, or even printed out, someone out there had to have this significant object. And in fact, the experiment was repeated several times by Rob Walker and Joshua Glenn, two writer journalists that wanted to quantify the impact of value. What you're seeing is the capacity of the human mind to ascribe a lot of value to intangible meaning. And it's this meaning that influences purchasing behavior. Compare our banana story to the price of toilet paper in the pandemic. Profitability for the banana increased because a story just added to its value. Profitability for the toilet paper was driven by supply and demand. I mean, fear led to panic buying, led to scarcity, led to extortionate prices. So let's take a look at how this framework applies to suppliers by looking at streaming services. I'm sure we're all really familiar with that nowadays. Netflix's core business, as we all know, is charging $15.99 a month for their streaming subscription service. The biggest driver of cost is this AAA tentpole content. And in fact, they raised prices last year for the loan. But when you think about it, the other networks also invest heavily into big budget tentpole content. And they cost less. I mean, Amazon Prime is free. Disney Plus and Apple TV Plus are $6.99 and $4.99 respectively. That's a lot less than $15.99. So how is it that they can charge the consumers less than Netflix? Why is their willingness to supply seemingly lower? Well, Amazon, Disney, and Apple all have other businesses, right? Amazon has e-commerce and AWS. Disney has theme parks and consumer products. Apple has hardware. For them, a dollar invested in streaming returns much more strategic value than the subscription revenue alone. And so the gap between willingness to supply and the cost that they sell at is incentive to sell. As long as there's an upside to selling, there's incentive to sell. And on the consumer end, as long as there's the market price is below the willingness to buy, there's incentive to buy. The more that a consumer feels like they're getting 10x the value for the price that they pay, the stronger that incentive. So now let's take a look at how this framework works for when it's applied to games as a service. Before digital distribution, it used to be that you purchased a physical game product. And much like toothpaste or cereal, game publishers just had to convince you before you left the store that their game was far better than the one right next to it. Games as a service really changed the way that players interact with game brands. extending the handshake beyond that initial purchase or download to include all these additional connection points between player and brand. And it has this impact on willingness to buy. And it's those touch points beyond that core product that drive up willingness to buy, much like the banana comic, and lower the floor for willingness to supply, much like the streaming SVOD examples. So while these touch points don't always have a measurable ROI, this framework can help you understand the impact of those activities on total value. And total value influences profitability and the bottom line in the long run. What excites me about AR/VR is the ability of the medium to unlock experiences that were previously inaccessible. And I believe that the fullest expressions of this potential will change the way that we connect with each other and build communities. Therefore, I believe that companies developing an XR should not only think about the product, but also about how they will service the users and communities around it. And there's so much to learn about customer experience from gaming. Next, we'll review 4 key trends that's affecting games as a service today in the context of the framework that I just shared with you. And along the way, I'll share some cool opportunity areas for XR companies. And we'll start here. I mean, in 2017, Epic transformed Fortnite, a $30 box product, to a free-to-play cross-platform battle royale. And since then, it's become a buzzword in the gaming industry. It wasn't the first game to do battle royale, cross-platform, or free-to-play, but it feels like everyone plays it. Rappers, sports pros, Marshmello, Travis Scott. Fortnite is much more than a game. It's a social network. It's an excuse for getting together. And in fact, 12.3 million people got together in Fortnite last month to watch Travis Scott live. Fortnite's community itself is valuable. It magnifies the value of everything the game gives players. It drives up incentive to buy. And by the way, a larger number of customers decreases the average cost per user, lowering the floor and increasing incentive to sell. What we're talking about isn't a new concept. It's called network effect. I mean, if you've ever played a game over another game because you thought that the matchmaking would be better, then you know exactly the value that I'm talking about. Network effect is critical to achieve for games as a service, where you're trying to create stickiness, a reason for players to keep coming back. And what helps build network effect is getting rid of all those barriers that prevent people from being able to play together on different platforms. So all these big name companies are investing a lot into creating cloud-based platforms. And the cloud is making it easier to matchmake, communicate, and share data across different hardware. Looking at XR today, the hardware market is very fragmented, which is already dividing a community that's already pretty small. Great content can attract people to any platform, that's true. But the friction around sharing those great experiences limits the reach of that content. The big winners in AR/VR are going to be the ones that figure out how to make experiences broadly accessible. Next area is microtransactions. Free-to-play games like Fortnite or League of Legends make money through microtransactions. It's been around for a while. And it's also become increasingly sophisticated because revenue depends on it, expectations are rising, and stakeholders are paying attention. The challenge with microtransactions is designing them in a way that provides greater than one-to-one value to the end user. Recall that if a consumer feels like they're getting 10x the value for 1x the price, they feel greater incentive to buy. The unique challenge about games is that gamers are anchored to this feeling that the value of digital goods is $0. This is a quote from Ernest Cline's Ready Player One. Though it's fiction, it does a really great job of capturing that common perception among gamers about microtransactions. There's a certain resentment. It's a feeling of being exploited by game publishers for these free ones and zeros. So game companies have combated this consumer bias by gamifying the purchase itself. And 2 examples are random mechanics and earning mechanics. Random mechanics are things like loot boxes, a sort of virtual raffle ticket that entitles a gamer to draw from a pool of prizes. Now, the value of those prizes can be anything from like 1x, 10x to 20x the cost of the ticket. And of course, you don't have an equal chance of getting the 1x item and the 20x item. And, you know, there's a lot of math done to ensure that the house wins on average. This is a very, very powerful tactic to create a 10x feeling. I mean, most of the time you might get a 1x item, but that one time you score a 20x item, it feels worth it. And it gives the winner a story. I mean, I don't bother telling people if I bought a TV, but if I won a TV, even a crappy one, I'll find it worth talking about. And if all this sounds and feels like gambling to you, you're not alone. Governments and interest groups are noticing, and they're responding with investigations and regulations. So another way that companies gamify microtransactions are through earning mechanics. Things like play passes, where the game gives opportunities to earn prizes for free within a set time period. But wait, you can purchase admission to a special club wherein you're guaranteed to earn better prizes. And usually, play passes incorporate random mechanics for the reasons explained before. But the earning component gives the user a greater sense of control, and it feels a lot less like pure gambling. Now, generally, microtransaction designs are trending away from these pure luck mechanics to incorporate earning mechanics. And, overall, I would have to say, like, exploitive e-commerce practices do increase incentive to buy. However, the increase is not sustainable if you're bleeding consumers dry and eroding trust. On the other end, governments and interest groups can turn hostile to those practices. I mean, increasing taxes, requiring licensing, mandating features, or even straight up censoring your game. And all this increases the cost and risk for companies to do business, reducing willingness to sell. And in this way, making easy money through exploitation reduces overall value in the long run. And you can observe a similar pattern outside of monetization in things like personal data. And being real for a moment, gambling and addiction are serious human conditions that ruin lives. There's a really fine line between stickiness and addiction. And it might be honestly impossible to avoid crossing at times. A promising approach that I've seen companies do is to give consumers the tools to manage this for themselves. Next up is spectating. There's a notion of licensing windows in film, where the first rights window is box office debut, and the additional rights windows are things like home video, TV, and merch. Usually, most revenue is generated in the first window, but the revenue streams from additional windows can make a difference to the P&L and can sometimes save a film. In games, things like esports create additional content and revenue windows, and esports is huge. Spectating is just as it sounds, people watching people play games. Sounds simple and quaint, but these numbers show that it's anything but. Spectating satisfies a need for a particular set of users, some of which may only want to interact with your game this way. In fact, many people who watch a game don't even play it. On the other hand, not all players care about spectating, like me sometimes. I mean, some games I just want to play, right? But even if they don't watch, second windows provide value to core players. I mean, if your nerdy hobby is suddenly hip, that's extra return on all those hours invested. Validation, and it impacts how much more time you're willing to spend, as well as the value you place on the experience. More game companies are designing games with spectating in mind. For example, the out-of-box gameplay in first-person shooters is just incomprehensible to watch. Imagine trying to understand a soccer match only from the perspective of the striker. So developers have been adding cameras to capture audience-friendly footage. Here you're seeing a top-down view of what you saw just on the previous page. Anyway, XR companies already face this challenge when it comes to creating video trailers. I mean, how do you capture that 3D 360 experience in a 2D format? Companies that crack this, though, they'll unlock broader experiences for their content, which might open up new revenue streams, but more importantly, add value for your consumer. The last area is IP expansion, which ranges from fan expressions like cosplay to high-end experiences like feature films and luxury goods. A successful game IP has to figure out how much to handle in-house versus licensing out. What's tricky is setting the right strategy and the right franchise roadmap with the right partners. In the end, most game companies decide to license. Why? Expertise. As someone who's built games and an animated series, I've built teams for both. I've managed people from both backgrounds, and I've seen how these worlds come together and where they don't. Take Agile and Waterfall, for example. They're just project management philosophies, but the mindset that people cultivate around them really make them a lot more like religion. And I'll say this much, Agile is efficient for interactive entertainment, wildly costly for linear entertainment. Anyway, because the businesses are less compatible than you'd think, most companies don't have the appetite to stomach the risk of being in both lines of businesses. I mean, overall, it's hard enough being in one vertical. And a telling example is the fact that Disney, despite so many successful lines of businesses in entertainment, licenses out its IP in gaming. The impact of IP extension increases incentive to buy. It'll expand the market for your products, deepen affinity, and raise the ROI for your existing fans. It can also increase your incentive to sell because every IP expression will have a multiplier effect. And the added synergy to your product ecosystem subsidizes your investment in any one area. Recall our SVOD examples like Amazon and Disney and Apple. Anyway, for XR companies, IP expansion probably feels like a distant possibility. I suggest that it's not too early to start tracking fan expressions and unlicensed merch. I mean, it'll give you a sense of what's resonating with your IP, as well as how well your IP travels across products. Anyway, we've covered trends in 4 key areas of games as a service today, with an eye on the total value that influences consumer and company behaviors. If there's one thing you take away from this talk, pay attention to customer experience. Great experience enhances values for customers, obviously, but ultimately value for your company. And done well, you'll be a part of your customers' lives and communities, a part of their identity, a way of life. For AR/VR companies, I encourage you to review. How do you elevate interactions with your products and services to create an experience that people need and crave in their lives? Thank you so much for your time. We're going to open things up for questions now.
Jane, thanks for joining us this morning. I think you might be muted.
Oh, yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, sorry. Thank you so much, Raymond. Thank you for having me. And thank you, everybody, for watching.
You know, I think it's interesting, like, yeah, you know, this tying kind of the existing gaming industry, especially all the crazy things that are going in there, especially like in Fortnite, Minecraft, Roblox, etc., to the XR space, VR specifically. How much do you think the kind of hardware element of VR specifically is impacting? You know, just the adoption of being able to play these games, being able to build a fandom around them, and et cetera. Do you think that is a stopper, or do you think it's just that it's still early?
I think it is a tad early in some ways because like when I did a lot of user research, I went out to like local VR rooms within LA and interviewed a bunch of people and yeah, it just, you know, the big hang up with a lot of more casual audiences is just they don't like to wear the thing on their head. Like it's cumbersome, it's expensive, unaffordable, or, you know, it just feels intimidating to kind of block out your senses like that. And so in some ways, I think gamers can lead the way because gamers, you know, tend to be okay with, you know, geeky hardware and learning about technology, and they love new platforms and sort of that immersive experience. And so I think gamers can be a great first audience, which I think a lot of people identify to. But I do think, like, you know, just as hardware does, it's going to get cheaper, better, faster. It's going to eventually be something as light as my glasses, hopefully. And at that point, I think it'll just be like, is the content there? And I think until the hardware kind of catches up, now is kind of a good time to really understand, you know, the format of VR, like what kinds of immersive experiences do people want to enjoy using, you know, in that platform.
Do you think blended experiences, kind of leveraging both those type of technologies as well as the more traditional, you know, controller, you know, and a flat screen sort of experience? Do you think that is what's an important moment for these technologies to achieve, or do you think that they'll always be kind of separated?
I think like it's gonna be just a different platform, and I think the content needs to be really tailored to AR VR. And we'll find it. Somebody will find it. Just the content that resonates on that platform. Just as you don't expect to watch a TV series on a gaming platform, even though sometimes it's been tried or whatever. Like games has its own format on consoles, right? And sometimes games that are really fun to play on a console aren't as fun to play on PC, and vice versa. Speaking as a PC player, but but yeah, so it's just like, you know, I think the trick right now is really find what resonates in that platform, and you know, I think cross-platform play between AR, VR, and other platforms it could happen in limited ways, but I think until we really figure out what resonates on AR, VR, like I think it's a lot further out.
Yeah, I mean, I think a year ago, no one would have thought that people would have wanted to watch music concerts in a video game. But you know, I'd say that the numbers definitely show otherwise, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. And I think that's an interesting thing about VR over even games, because games is really interactive. It's a way, especially during these times, for people to be together apart. But VR and AR, like they add an added layer of immersion and an added layer of just like feeling integrated with your reality. that's going to be so unique to that platform. And I think the more that content creators can really tap into that, the more powerful the platform and the stronger the draw for audiences.
Fantastic. Well, Jane, thanks for joining us this morning. I think there's a lot to learn. You've synthesized a lot of information, and I think that our audience will be able to take a lot from that, and hopefully allow that to make kind of this next generation of interactive experiences.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thanks again, everybody, for watching.
All right, we're about to head to break, but just a reminder: all this content is being captured, so you'll be able to watch the content from the gaming track as well as all the tracks later on today, as well as coming up at 11:50 we'll be streaming the Augie Awards on Channel 1. One last thing, a shout out to our sponsors, our titanium sponsors, HP, Microsoft, Qualcomm, and Unity, as well as our gold sponsor, PlugXR. We're getting ready to go to a break, and we should be back in 20 minutes.